Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a warm welcome to the launch of the Asia-Pacific Trade and Investment Report 2017. To begin our proceedings this afternoon, I would like to invite the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, to introduce the Up-Tier series and to deliver the opening statement. Thank you, Dr. Akhtar.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and of course distinguished delegates of ACPR and other members. 2017 Asia-Pacific Trade and Investment Report, which I'm sure you have it in your hands now, offers optimism as global and regional demand are recovering. Turnaround is evident as Asia-Pacic's exports are set to grow by 4.5% and imports by 8% in volume terms in 2017, after declining in 2015 and 2016. Trade growth picked up in the fourth quarter of 2016 and continued to grow in the first half of 2017. This momentum should continue for the rest of the year. Developing Asia's exports at 4.8% are expected to be growing at a faster pace than developed Asia, which will be around 3.3%. Overall, despite its ups and downs, the Asia-Pacific region continues to be the world's largest trading region with about 40% of global trade. Trade prospects are promising as activity in global value chains gain momentum in countries such as the Republic of Korea and the Philippines, and the prices of industrial commodities and fuel rose, benefiting, of course, commodity producers and exporters. Uncertainties, however, remain for 2018. Structural constraints impacting trade performance since the global financial crisis persist, and import demand in developed economies and in China has not fully recovered. Import demand in China, especially for intermediate inputs, is likely to moderate in the wake of its structural rebalancing. Together, these factors have dampened intra-regional demand, which may not be sufficient to bring trade growth back as yet to pre-crisis levels. The protectionist rhetoric in some developed economies brings additional risks and creates a disincentive for investment. These dynamics may persist, which would weigh on global and regional trade recovery in coming years. We forecast the export volume of Asia-Pacific region in 2018 will grow more modestly than in 2017 at 3.3%, while the import volume will increase also by less than 3%. Export and import prices, especially commodity prices, are not likely to increase. In fact, they may trend downward due to the potential slowdown of investment and consumption precipitated by rising uncertainties. The sluggish prices will cause trade value growth in 2018 to be much slower than in 2017. Trade in commercial services has recovered, but continues to be led by only a handful of countries. An interesting trend emerging in Asia Pacific is the diversification in new types of services and increasing share of trade in finance and insurance services. Telecommunications, computer, and information services are some examples. The proliferation of internet access means some goods previously traded as mercantilized goods, such as books and musics, which are now increasingly traded as services. We expect the growth in trade and services to continue, especially since barriers to trade in this area have fallen over the past 3 years. After a decline in 2016, foreign direct investment flows increased, backed by a significant increase in greenfield inflows to the region. Foreign direct investments have been directed towards services and technology advanced sectors, supported by sophisticated and more capital intensive production networks, both in major economies such as China and smaller economies such as Vietnam. Growing diversification in energy sector to renewable and alternative sources has also attracted foreign direct investment inflows. Outward investments from the region grew relative to decline in global outflows. In 2016, outflows from Asia accounted for over 1/3 of global foreign direct investment outflows, with China's foreign investment abroad jumping by 44%, resulting in China's outflows exceeding its FDI inflows. Economic restructuring in China is providing new opportunities for China's direct investment in smaller South and Southeast Asian economies. Chinese multinational enterprises are now targeting a wide range of strategic industrial sectors. Looking ahead, a combination of service sector liberalization and efforts to improve business environments in recipient countries bode well for FDI growth. Analyzing trade and investment trends now offers us an opportunity to rethink trade and investment policies for sustainable development. Not to mention that thinking in this direction will also spur trade further, knowingly that 2018 may not be such a bright year. The positive links between trade and economic growth, and to a lesser extent between FDI and economic growth, are well established. But the social and environmental impacts of trade and investment liberalization are less obvious. In addition, there is growing public recognition that liberalization creates both winners and losers, even when economies grow in aggregate. In that context, the report presents a simple framework to guide and encourage trade and investment into sustainable development. It advocates a combination of changes in domestic policies, such as environmental and social and labor policies, and targeted tariff cuts and non-tariff measures to support sustainable investments. It calls for incentivizing voluntary sustainability standards and prioritizing FDI in SDG-related sectors such as health, education, and renewable energy. Key enablers of sustainable trade and investments can also be education policies, tax policies, and competition policies. Two additional key enablers in achieving more sustainable trade and FDI that our report recommends are trade facilitation and good governance. Without cutting red tape and reducing trade transaction cost, attracting FDI, and enabling participation of more firms and people in international trade will not be possible. And without good governance, including effective public institutions and rule of law, policies will not be enforced, no matter how well crafted and sustainable they may be. The report's analysis confirms a strong and positive link between FDI and both trade and growth. As I mentioned earlier, this is a reality. For instance, without FDI flows, the size of regional economy would be at least 7% smaller. Impact across region, however, would vary as the contribution of FDI would depend on how sustainable development is anchored in FDI and supported by enabling domestic policies, and how businesses and investors embed sustainability in their operations and management. To illustrate this, the report offers an impact analysis under different trade scenarios, incorporating complementary policies such as effective tariff and investment liberalization with due considerations to three dimensions of sustainable development to examine their implications, most of all, on CO2 emissions, inequality, and undernourishment. This analysis of our report shows that an integrated sustainable development approach that factors in environmental and social consideration in course of data and investment liberalization will boost trade by over 175 billion with enhanced development outcomes. Moreover, lowering trade and investment barriers, as well as cutting trade costs and streamlining trade-related procedures regionally in an integrated manner, increases the competitiveness of regional firms in the global market by enabling them to effectively participate in global value chains. To conclude, our analytical work, which is not only this report, but several other reports that I would very much encourage you to look at on our website, offers a strong case for expanding multilateral and regional cooperation to promote trade and investment liberalization, but doing so with due regard to ensuring policies and investments to minimize the attendant social and environmental risks. It further indicates that protectionism or resorting to global tariffs would generate economic losses close to 380 billion a year for the region and aggravate economic and social distress. Going forward, trade and investment facilitation and liberalization should be accompanied by policies that foster inclusive and competitive trade, taking advantage of regional connectivity and addressing undesirable social and environmental side effects. With this, I conclude, but I would be amiss if I did not recognize the team of Trade and Investment Division under the leadership of Ms. Mia Mimik to really congratulate also at my level, but on behalf of all of you, for producing this piece of work, which goes beyond the trend analysis to bringing in the more complex elements of how we can integrate sustainable development within our trade and investment policies, as well as in terms of our flows, which will augur well and will jumpstart in a more sustainable manner exports, which are quite critical for the balance of payment stability of a number of countries in our region. So thank you, Mia, and to your colleagues for starting this new direction, and hope that we can build on this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akhtar. And now I would like to invite Ms. Mia Mikic, Director of the Trade, Investment and Innovation Division, to present the findings of the report.
Thank you, Ricardo. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Akhtar, for introducing the theme of this year's Asia-Pacific Trade and Investment Report and for highlighting the main findings. And thank you very much for the praise that you have added so kindly in the end. I think I have gotten now really only 15 minutes to present the findings of the report, and I need a clicker, sorry. To move along with the presentation. So let me just start with a little storyline that this report includes. As indicated already, we are finally seeing some optimism shining through the dark clouds, and we finally see some positive movements in terms of export from the region. It is still very much far cry from what we had before the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, and even though we have very positive results that I will be talking about in more detail soon for 2017, looking into 2018, we again see some gray clouds on a horizon. They come mostly from three elements, obviously more, but these are highlighted from the movements of commodity prices, from macroeconomic policies that are locked into the austerity mode of the various governments in advanced and emerging economies, not allowing demand to grow at the desirable level, and of course from the many uncertainties, economic and others, that result in sometimes very wrong policy reactions that start the vicious circle and then impact growth of both GDP and trade in an adverse manner. So from this state of art, if you wish, in terms of trade investment flows, we move on to understand how we can nudge trade and investment in a direction of really help us deliver sustainable development goals. And this is because what is not uncertain in current global environment is rising inequalities and existing and deepening environmental damages and divide between have and have-nots, and also the problems that we have in terms of maintaining peace and stability, not only within but also between countries. So all of this provides the platform through which we want to look at how can we actually change the narrative about trade investment policies to contribute positively and in a sustained manner to sustainable development goals. And this is what this report really is about. So it tries to provide a platform for thinking about how we can change trade and investment policies and place them in the nexus of overall policy making. Now, many of you will now think as I speak, well, we have talked about that for many years. We know that we need to do that. And what this report actually wants to do, and I think it does do, is to look at what sort of channels we can use to produce such coherent and complex policy making, and what would be the impact? What would be the impact of those policies vis-a-vis the policies that are done in a singular and individual standalone manner? So as Dr. Akhtar indicated, this is the first step towards a much more comprehensive work of research in this area, but I think we are on a good path here, and that we are moving in the right direction in terms of research of ESCAP as a think tank in the region. So what very briefly, I'm going to lead you through some of the findings in terms of the part 1 that analyzes trends and developments in trade of merchandise services in the region, and also foreign direct investment flows. As I said, we have finished 2016 on a negative tone. The global exports was down by 3.2%. The regional export was actually down by more than that, by 4.3%. That still kept the region as being the major trader in the world, contributing 40% of global export and a little bit less of the global imports. But when we look at the drivers of these negative results in terms of 2016, we find that the major trader in the region, China, actually contributing the most. And the export from China fell by 7.7%. And when we look at the developing Asia Pacific economies, their fall in export was only about 3.6%. On the other hand, 2016 brought some positive news for developed group in Asia Pacific, and that was driven by recovery of exports in Japan. Many commentators, including us, assigned that to one of the factors for that was increased competitiveness of Japanese exports due to the recovery of, or correction rather, of Japanese yen after a long period of being overpriced. Now, when we look at the structure of trade in the region, we still find that it is very much concentrated on few countries. 13 economies in the region contribute 90% of trade. And looking even deeper into this structure, we see that about 4 economies in North and East Asia contribute about 60% of that trade. So this is a high concentration, saying that out of all this dynamism, probably not too many economies benefit. And this is one of the reasons why it is really urgent to look at how trade can be positioned to share the benefits from trade in a more inclusive manner across the countries as well as within the countries. Now, the intra-regional trade remain more important than trade with the rest of the world. It is still above 50%. It is actually reaching 60%. And it is, again, very interesting to find that about a quarter of that is done with China only. So China remains a driver of intra-regional trade and of the trade of the region with the world. And therefore, we have to really pay close attention on what is going to be happening with the further structural reforms in China in order to understand how it will impact the rest of the region in terms not of only trade, but also, of course, foreign direct investment. In the report, we provide more details on that, but let me move on with our projections for the 2017 and 2018. It is, what is today? 30th of October. So it's probably easy to say something about 2017 because there is only one month or 2 months to go. The projection is positive, so we are looking at in real terms at the growth of exports at around 4.5% for the region, and almost double that on the import side. But it's not going to be long lasting, according to our our model, because as already noted, there are issues with sustaining this import demand in the advanced economies. There are, as I hinted, possible implications from further restructuring in China that will create some possible downside risks on the export for the rest of the Asia to China, and of course something that we cannot escape from, because when we open our internet browsers, when we open newspaper, when we open television, the first thing that hits us is this populist, protectionist rhetoric in some of the advanced economies, and slowly seeping into other parts of the world. This creates uncertainties, and we have done a simple correlation and looked into how these uncertainties actually may impact economic growth and growth of trade. And of course, as expected, it is a correlation that goes downward. The higher the uncertainties, the slower the growth, and that was also supported by the research done by our colleagues in macro division through the work for survey. Much more on that will need to be done, and I think we'll keep close eye on how these uncertainties will pen in our region. Now, in terms of services, commercial services trade, the recovery was less bombastic than in merchandise trade, but this is also because the services always take a little longer lag to react to changes in the global economy. The region is getting bigger in terms of the share of the global commercial services trade. Now it takes about 30% of exports, and again, as in merchandise, but more, perhaps even more sharply, this trade is really captured by only 4 economies in the region: China, India, Japan, and Singapore, while the rest are still lagging behind in terms of their contribution. Now, of course, there are many small countries within which some commercial services, including tourism, play a very dominant role in their own economies. But in terms of their contribution to the regions standing in the global trade of commercial services, this is still relatively minor. The region's commercial services trade is driven by so-called other commercial services that include telecommunication, financial services, ICT sector, and new services driven by the digitalization of trade and production. So prospects are probably bright, and I think with the further progress in the region of removing some of the still persistent barriers to services sector, these prospects may come true in terms of region providing even more services in terms of trade, but also in getting in their own economies supply of services in a more efficient manner, because this is the key to maintaining competitiveness in industrial sector, in agricultural sector as well, as our research from the last year up there shows. Now, moving into the world of foreign direct investment, the region still captures lots of interest from the investors around the world. It did not do very well in terms of attracting the overall FDI, but when we zoomed into the greenfield investment, actually it increased by 12% last year. And I think this is a positive change, because so far what was growing into the region was merger and acquisition, and we know that in many cases this does not directly contribute to the productive capacity as does the greenfield investment. Now, in terms of sectoral inflows, what we have noted is a marked shift towards services and technology sectors, with large component of knowledge-intensive activities being attracting new investment. And again, this is a positive signal, because it will allow the economies that do attract such investment to restructure their economy towards higher productivity and higher efficiency. China is also now the leading investor in terms of outward flows in the region, and is becoming a very large investor in the at the global scene. Actually, such large outflow of investment from China in 2016 invited some of the capital control within China, because it was noted to be too sudden, too much, and we'll see how will that feed into 2017 and 18 data. In general, the investment flows have been helped by liberalization progress, and lots of that has been brought in not only through the unilateral autonomous changes in investment regimes by countries, but also by their inclusion of investment liberalization provisions into various bilateral and regional free trade agreements that now, almost as a rule, include a chapter that regulates the investment provisions as well. So this is as much, that I have time to talk about here, but of course the part one includes much more detail in terms of the flows and looking at different sub-regions, and then also you will find in front of this room the individual country and sub-regions briefs that will give you much more detail on all of this for the economies that you may be interested in. Let me now move to part two and present our findings, or our framework and findings for this theme of this year's report, channeling trade and investment into sustainable development. As I said, we have long known that trade liberalization and opening of the economy creates winners and losers. This is in trade literature. This is in all literature, right? Policymakers have been informed about that. They learned about it. The fact of the matter is that we have always brushed it under the rug. We have always sort of put it aside and recognized the fact, but never did anything very decisively about fixing that. And so what we thought is we would want to see what sort of policies combinations can deal with this occurrence of winners, which is inevitable, but it is not inevitable that we let losers to linger without any assistance, and to actually worsen, to let them be even worse after these policies are being put in place. So this is where our thinking was, and our motive was for doing this theme's report, is really to explain the benefits of coherent policy making, and to look at what sort of policies should be in there, and what is the impact of the combination of those policies. So the framework that we have created is rather simple. It may not look so simple from your distance because you probably can't read the words, but in a way it looks like some sort of vehicle going somewhere, right? So you can see it as a little almost plane that will lead to sustainable development if we fire it properly and if we provide the engine to it. Now, what we tried to do is really see how we can change the business as usual trade and investment policies to result with not only economic benefits, because they will do that, as we know from empirical literature and from the experience living in Asia, but how we actually ascertain that the social outcomes, that the environmental outcomes of such policies will be also desirable and socially acceptable. And we chose to do that by doing empirical work, by really looking at different combination of policies and measuring their impact. And but before we have done this empirical work, we have laid out the framework for how we see these policies working together. So obviously we start with the traditional trade policy, investment policy making, where you open up economy, you remove the barriers, and you allow transactions across the border to flow relatively freely. And then we have built up other policies to that state of liberalization to correct for the losses that such opening creates, right? So we have looked at how we can do more efficient integration of the economies to create more employment through combining liberalization with investment, but also with direct trade cost cutting measures, right? And so we call that as an integrated liberalization package, right? And we have shown, and I will show you the results in a few slides down the presentation, that obviously unexpectedly the results are positive. But at the same time, also, as we know, the social and the environmental effects will not be acceptable of such policies. So what we then added is a certain corrective policies coming from domestic complementary policies and coming from direct policies dealing with environment and social dimensions, right? As putting in place policies to prevent further damage of environment through reducing or mitigating the CO2 emissions, or direct social policies that would deal with the transfer of income from, say, skilled to unskilled through the, of course, fiscal mechanism and taxation policies, right? So we then also looked at what needs to be in place for such policies to work, and since our division is a leading work in various aspects of trade facilitation, we have used all that knowledge that we have created so far to complement our thinking in that area, and we have found that all these measures that are related to trade facilitation, including the paperless trade facilitation, would enhance the results that we get from the standard package of policies. And as mentioned by Dr. Akhtar, the element that is needed in this policy mix is good governance, and good governance at all levels. And while the report talks about the governance from the business sector into the higher echelons, I would want to measure here also the need for national level governance, the need to understand what policies need to be done and to look at the policies in a more comprehensive manner rather than be looking at the sectoral types of policies. I'm talking about the need to coordinate and create coherent policies rather than to get out there and create the policies from the separate line ministries. So what we have modeled first and foremost was the direct impact of foreign direct investment. And the reason why we're doing that is that really it is a rather murky area in terms of research, in terms of the impacts. We all expect for foreign direct investment to always have very positive impact on growth. Yet the numbers that are obtained through empirical analysis often are not supportive of that expectation. Even here, while we find that that overall GDP of the whole region with FDI is 7% larger than what it would be without such FDI, the question may be asked, why only 7%? Is that large enough for the type of inflows that are coming into the region? So I think more research into that will go to understand better the obstacles for not even having better results in terms of the size of the impact, but in terms of the sign of the impact, we do find all positive signs, and so we have the impact that allows improvement of both social and environmental aspects that come along, but they need to be nudged, as it is popular now to say after the newest economic prize winner. They need to be nudged by complementary policies. The automatic mechanisms will not work there. And these complementary policies in investment, as will be discussed in our committee starting tomorrow, based on a major piece of work on FDI promotion and facilitation done here by ESCAP, will show that it will imply a stronger role of government in regulating foreign direct investment. And if we ever want to admit that the government is not a problem but a solution, the foreign direct investment is actually one area where that is clearly so. I need to hurry up, I'm told. So very quickly, let me just say for many economists that are sitting in this room, the model that we used in doing our empirical work is CGE type of a model known as GTAP model. It is a multi-region, multi-sector model, and we have approached our modeling by trying to build the scenarios of policies that were described in this framework and trying to then impute, to simulate the impacts of such policies. We started, as I said, with pure simple tariff liberalization and then build up in including various other policies. Lots of details are available in the report. I can't even possibly go into them now, but I'm giving you some contrast in terms of results that were obtained in four elements, in terms of GDP growth, in terms of export growth, and the impact on CO2 emissions and the impact on inequality of this region. Again, this is being averaged and aggregated at the level of the sub-regions. There are also some country level results that are available on request. But what we see here, and I don't think you have a legend in the graph, but let me explain to you, if you can differentiate the colors so far from the screen, the blue color bar is the results associated with integrated trade and investment liberalization. The brown or orange type of bar is associated with the policies related to implementing of the Paris Accord. I assume everyone knows what is that about. The green bar, which I hope you can see, is associated with the policies, social policies that would shift 3% of income from skilled to unskilled and help mitigate the adverse inequality effect. And the purple bar are the impacts of all policies together. Right? So the combined liberalization policies with the Paris Accord and with the income transfer themselves. And you can see that in terms of really comparing just trade, just the opening policies and these coherent policies, coherent mixed policies, we win on the coherent size, right? And the purple bars are showing much better results in all four of these categories, bar some very specific cases. So this gives us a good, I think, standing to come with some policy proposals, policy recommendations for the region. We have listed many. The menu of these is quite large in the report, but here in this presentation, there are summed under 4 titles. The first type of policies is really to as also said by Dr. Akhtar, to stay away from protectionist policies and continue with opening policies, but make these policies, of course, smart policies, meaning contributing to the coherent package. We have actually also modeled the results of something that would end in a global tariff war, and obviously this results are very speculative in terms of assumptions of what is put in the model, but the losses are very large, and hopefully they will be accepted as deterrent to any further protectionist policies. The second type of measures are to deal with social and environmental impacts of liberalization. So to put in place the policies that would work on those losers, on the losing sectors, losing groups, losing even countries, if you wish, if you take it from the global point of view. We focused really on how do we make trade and investment cheaper, so not to waste resources and to use those resources to be available for these complementary policies. The third type of measures deal with strengthening regional cooperation and integration. ESCAP is, of course, working with all member countries towards a goal of having tighter regional cooperation and integration, and we support that work by providing countries with various sort of tools to make such cooperation more effective in terms of economic benefits, and we certainly will enrich that work with now looking at this comprehensive policy making and turning these deep agreements really being instrument of sustainable development rather than only trade expansion. The last type of measures deal with enabling further research and evidence-based policy making. that evidence coming from the research, and that research being done in the region. ESCAP is obviously the leading think tank in the region from the UN side, and it's working with many other sub-regional entities and individual universities in terms of strengthening that capacity. But we know that the major obstacle towards having successful result in research is availability of data. So I think one of the calls to the governments from outside will be to facilitate the generation and dissemination of data that is necessary. So, in short, this is what report is about. I had to fly through some of the chapters very quickly. I hope you will have opportunity to look at the report in more detail. There are, as I said, country and sub-regional briefs available, also in some of the national languages. And also there will be background papers that have been produced for the report, as well as some case studies and interesting boxes online. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm sorry that I have gone over time, maybe double my allotment, but as you said, Dr. Akhtar, the team has worked so hard, and I thought they deserve a full briefing from me rather than just skipping over some of the details. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Mikic, for that very informative presentation. I'd like to now invite Mr. Stephen Olson, who's a research fellow at the Henrik Foundation, to provide some comments on the report.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. I'd like to extend my gratitude to ESCAP for your very kind invitation, and to also add my congratulations for a very impressive piece of work that you've done here. I wanted to focus on one particular theme from the report which resonated most deeply with me, and that is the need to gear our trade and investment policies, as well as our domestic policies, towards greater sustainability. We now understand that trade, in order to be sustainable, that trade needs to be conducted in a way that doesn't just generate economic growth. It needs to be conducted in a way that generates growth that is both inclusive and improves rather than exacerbates income inequalities. We know that trade needs to be conducted in a way that strengthens social capital. And here we're talking about things like having reasonable labor standards in place, labor standards that protect not only worker safety, but also worker dignity. We're talking about educational systems, quality educational systems, and widespread access. And of course, trade also needs to be conducted in a way that does not result in environmental degradation or the exhaustion of precious, non-renewable resources. Now, of course, as everybody in this room, I'm sure, is aware, what I'm describing basically are the accepted three pillars of sustainability: economic, social, and environment. My organization, the Heinrich Foundation, partnered with the Economist Intelligence Unit to produce a sustainable trade index in which we attempted to evaluate and rank 20 economies around the region on the basis of how sustainable their trade practices were by looking at their trade practices across those three pillars. Now, I want to be clear, we don't want to pretend for 1 minute that we have all the answers, and in fact, we're very certain that we do not have all the answers. Likewise, it's not our intention to try to tell governments what they should be doing. Our real motivation was to stimulate discussion around how to promote greater sustainability. Okay, and discussions exactly like the ones that we're having here today. Now, I don't want to go into any detail on the Sustainable Trade Index. If you'd like to take a look at it, it's on heinrichfoundation.com. But I wanted to highlight two messages because I think they relate directly to the good work that ESCAP has done on their report. And the first message is that when we approach sustainability and international trade, policymakers need to approach it from the mindset of a marathon runner and not a sprinter. Okay, it's very important to resist the temptation of short-term payoffs from international trade that can undermine sustainability over the longer term. And the second point that I'd like to highlight is that these sustainability practices should not be seen as coming at the expense of economic growth. And in fact, quite to the contrary, we're coming to realize that building sustainability into our trade practices actually supports economic growth. And as such, we think that sustainability should be part of really any country's economic development plans. Finally, I'd like to take half a step back and make a couple of broad observations on this whole topic of sustainability and how we should be approaching it that I would draw from my more than 20 years of working on these issues. In the past, I think there was an unfortunate tendency to view the business community as in almost adversarial terms when it comes to sustainability. Now, personally, I'm not sure if that was ever the case, but I am quite sure that it's much less the case today. And in fact, we're seeing now that the business community not only can be full partners in working towards greater sustainability, that in many cases, it's actually the business community that is in the lead. In many cases, it's actually the business community that is ahead of governments, and in many cases, it's actually the business community that is ahead of international institutions and organizations. To give you a bit of a flavor for what I'm talking about, I'll mention I've spent a good deal of time looking into foreign direct investment in China and the conduct of multinational corporations. A couple of interesting things I'll share with you. You're all familiar with the global chemical firm BASF. When they came into China and they evaluated the environmental laws and regulations that they would be required to comply with in China, they looked at them and they said, no thank you, they're not tough enough. Your environmental regulations are not good enough. We're going to voluntarily comply with a higher level of environmental standards. So a case where a company is in fact leading the government. There's also an instance in which a number of chemicals were fully approved for use in China. And BASF said, no, we've got some concerns. We understand that we're legally able to use these chemicals. We understand that we're legally permitted. But we have some concerns about the impact of these chemicals on the communities in which we're operating in. So voluntarily, we're not going to use these chemicals. So I don't want to be naive. We know that there are bad actors out there, and we will always be able to find examples of companies behaving in abusive and incorrect ways. But I just want to make the point that more and more businesses are not only partners in sustainability, but in some cases are also leading the effort. We've got case after case. We talk about social capital. Got case after case where multinational corporations develop research and educational institutions in the countries that they're doing business in order to improve and enhance the social capital in the countries that they operate in. And examples after examples of transportation and logistical companies coming into countries and voluntarily using fuel-efficient fleets, even though they're not required in any way to do it, and even though their competitors are not using those same fleets. So again, I don't want us to be naive. I don't want us to have a Pollyannish view of it. We will always be able to find bad actors and examples of companies doing things that they should not be able to do. But the point I'd like to make is that if it was ever appropriate to view the business community in adversarial terms, and I'm not convinced it was, but if it ever was appropriate, it's not appropriate today, and we can look to build closer working partnerships with the business community on these issues that are important to us. So I wanted to keep my remarks brief, so I think I'll draw my comments to a conclusion there. But once again, my thanks and my congratulations to ESCAP, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue with all of you on these important issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Olson, for those insightful comments. That brings us to the final portion of our event. I would like to invite questions from the floor. Members of the audience, if you could identify yourself, and we'll take one round of questions before we get our panel to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Virginia Tanase. I am the Chief of Transport Facilitation and Logistics. The report is highlighting the importance of the trade facilitation and the good governance as key enablers. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on the results of this report, because its implicit trade facilitation brings transaction cost reduction. Mm-hmm. So I would like to learn, because I want to apply this. If you could elaborate a little bit more on the result of this report, and what would be your recommendations for the countries in the area of trade facilitation and its importance. Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, so Ms. Mikic, perhaps, or yes?
Thank you very much for this. Well, I have a report in front of me. I can open it to the pages that are relevant and point you to this. But as I said, we have very rich research going on in terms of trade facilitation, and starting with understanding what is the level of trade cost from our data or comprehensive trade cost database that allowed us to actually feed into the GTAP model in terms of actual shock that will be induced to see the outcome of that, which was in positive terms increase of GDP and export with lesser environmental damage than the policies that are just opening economy through the cut of tariffs and opening the investment. So this was the macro, the result that we achieved in terms of and it was modeled by directly reducing the trade cost using that indicator that we generate by surveying economies globally and understanding their progress in terms of implementing various type of trade facilitation policies, including with transparency and procedural compliance, and also some of the cross-border trade and paperless trade within the country. So that index is also available through the other TID research, right? Looking at the other part of your question and looking at what we recommend countries to do, we don't actually stay at the macro level saying, oh, well, you need to reduce cost, but we also use the results from our case by case and product by product analysis in terms of where the inefficiencies in trade process lay by using the business process analysis, right? So we talk about the need to implement the basic trade facilitation measures, but we also talk about, of course, implementing paperless trade, and if I may recommend all the countries to sign into the paperless trade treaty, but also go into the need of investment in hard infrastructure and improvement of the customs and other facilities related to clearing of goods that come before and through the border. And then, of course, from your own area, you mentioned transport and transit facilitation. Obviously, the cost can be cut by members being part of the agreement that allow smooth transit through the territories. That will save the time and therefore the cost. And all of these measures actually build into the reduction of cost that produce economic benefits, and then roll out into a more efficient impact on environment as well, because not so much resources are used.
Thank you, Ms. Mikic. Is there perhaps an additional question, a follow-up question? Yes, ma'am.
My question is, like you talked about good governance in your presentation. So can you please elaborate more specifically in terms of business practices? And was it like taken into consideration?
I would again refer to the report for more details. But we have used the research that is done by other institutions, in concretely World Economic Forum as well, in terms of ranking of government. Business environments and governments in terms of good governance. But sorry, I was a little bit distracted when you were posing your question. It is about the business practices, right? Okay, so I think we have a unit in our division that deals with development of enterprise, and comes always with certain recommendations of course, corporate social responsibility and the behavior of businesses that would adhere to the principles of, first of all, Global Compact that was driven by UN in some years back, but also nowadays with really looking into adhering to the even human rights and improving the business practices in that context. I think Stephen here is also involved in some of the initiatives at the UN level that would produce more practical guidance in terms of how to adhere to these very novel and broad charters at the UN level and apply them at the business level. It is, of course, hard. In some of the countries, the business practices are not monitored, and I think advanced economies have advantage in terms of the consumers of the goods produced by the companies in such economies watch over the behavior of these companies. Maybe this is not still so prevalent and spread in the developing economies, but it is coming there. And I think with the change of the behavior including from education, from the young age, we can get into inherent good business practices that would help this notion of good governance, right? But governments are not. I think we don't abstract from looking at governments as well in this context. So it is wider than just business practices. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question, and I think we'll wrap it up after that. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Hang Chen. I'm working at the Enhanced Integrated Frameworks, housed at the World Trade Organizations. So, as many of you may not know, the EIF, Enhanced Integrated Framework, is a dedicated program for least developed countries to promote trade. My question is related to the way forward that Mia referred to, and it's about the need to facilitate investment in the least developed countries, and to attract FDI, and investment promotions. Has ESCAP have already kind of ongoing initiative to promote investment in LDCs? And if yes, have you seen the area where the enhanced integrated framework as the trade partnership program for LDC can collaborate with you? I see you smiling, so that you may have already answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We welcome working with enhanced integrated framework at any time. Enhanced integrated framework is a key vehicle of helping and streaming the financing and other resources to help LDCs, and in particular with their graduation, as well as achievement of SDGs. And as such, we definitely partner in terms of both trade and investment policies. We have worked in terms of promotion of FDI through providing training and capacity building to the governments and to the business sector in terms of what policies are necessary, and then how to actually maximize the use of these policies, particularly if the players are not large companies but smaller companies, and how they can make use of available investment and financing and other financing that come into the country. We haven't put in place any concrete program in terms of actual groundwork in the LDCs, and I can't refer you to any results based on that. But we have worked with a number of countries in terms of changing or adjusting their foreign direct investment laws and regulations towards being more facilitating and attractive to getting new investment for the appropriate sectors, for the sectors that would improve productive capacity, that would not be lodged into the traditional extractive industries, but would allow such economies to actually gain some benefits from processing and for getting involved in global value chains or regional value chains, etc. So we are working with different stakeholders on laying the groundwork in terms of regulatory arrangements, and in terms of what instruments the government can use to attract FDI, but we haven't directly worked with any big company in terms of practicing that. Maybe we can do some pilot work in that together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that round of questions. That brings us to the end of the launch of the 2017 UPTIR report. We'd like to thank Dr. Akhtar, Ms. Mikic, and also Mr. Olsen for their time, and especially also to the Trade and Investment Division for such a comprehensive report. Well done. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Ricardo, for moderating. Thank you, everyone, for being here as well from our side. May I ask, may I ask the UPTIR team, actually, Yes, please. We have 5 minutes, Jan. Particularly Jan, we want to have a photo with the after copies here. So can we have after team coming on front? Thank you. This invitation is for interns as well, of course, because they contributed a lot.